Welcome to the OneFix YouTube channel. I'm Craig, the Managing Director, and all I can say is like and subscribe because we're going to have some great content coming on how to do things, hints and tips on your PCs, behind the scenes footage, and loads more. So, yep, hit the like, hit the subscribe, and hit the bell.
We're live. Great. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to attend our webinar today. We're talking about the value and the role of pen testing. I'm Craig from OneFix, and I'll do a proper intro in a second, but also I just wanted to introduce Leon from IT Governance. Hi, Leon.
Hello.
Thank you so much for coming to join us today. I appreciate you giving up your time. I'll start off, before we kick the presentation off, I will start off by saying I'm an absolute newbie, Luddite, novice with pen testing. I don't know a huge amount about it other than the basic high-level stuff. So this is also going to be as interesting for me as it is for our attendees. So what we'll do, Leon, I'll kick the presentation off in a second,
sure.
And I'll probably hand over to you and just let you talk through. I might jump in with some questions and interject as things ping to my mind. But for those of you who are on the webinar live, there is I think there should be a chat link on the side of the page where you can pop your questions in. So if you pop any questions into the chat, what we'll do is if they're relevant and we're at the right point, I might just break in, Leon, and ask them to you at that point. But also we do have we've got a slide at the end for any other questions. So without further ado, I will hit the button and start the presentation, and I'll shut up for a minute. So here we go. So that first slide is me. There you go. So I won't shut up. I'll carry on talking. So to intro me, hi everybody again. I'm Craig. For those of you that don't know me, I am the Managing Director at OneFix. We are basically a managed service provider and IT security provider as well. So I've been in the business 22 plus years, helping clients with their IT needs and cybersecurity. We are our whole thing is really SME support. So we specialize in supporting businesses with under 250 staff with kind of their full IT needs. Alongside, again, that's kind of evolved over the years into much more of cybersecurity as well, because that's been a huge hot topic in the past sort of 10 so years with everything rising and the rise of cybercrime. For those of you that don't know, again, we started as a bit of a garage-based startup. We haven't quite done as well as Hewlett-Packard and some of the other famous garage-based startups, but we did start in a garage in 2002, and it truly was a garage. It was my home garage. Team of 13 of us now, and we are in Winners Triangle near Wokingham, which is near Reading. And Jess has very kindly put these slides together, and she's put in there that we won awards for workplace wellbeing and IT industry awards. So I guess it's worth touching on that. We are a real core part of what we do is actually having that small team. We're very focused on the team and the people in the business. So we're very proud to have won the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce Workplace Wellbeing Awards for all the stuff that we do, alongside awards for IT service, customer service. I think we've been top 50 MSP for 5 years in a row. So I think we're doing kind of the right things. Right, I shall skip on now to Leon. There you go, Leon. Over to you.
Good morning, all. So I'm one of the pen testers at IT Governance and one of the senior penetration testers we have. So I've been pen testing for over 13 years now, not just IT Governance, but other companies across the country. I have specialized areas which I work in, which is systems infrastructure and web applications. I do like my breakouts. They're trying to get out of environments that are supposed to be locked down, such as kiosks, and social engineering. So that is trying to break into buildings and getting in without being caught and then getting away with the data. So I kind of like that side of things. I do actively comment on media posts and ask for comment for those, such as the Times, for example. I'm very much into my tech and my cybersecurity, and I like doing my competitions. The CTF's a big part of what I enjoy doing. And that's not just in the UK, that's in other countries where I have first place, which has led to some really nice prizes and after parties specifically. And I do a bit of cyber mentoring just for people up and coming in the industry, because there's so much content out there, but there's a lot you got to filter through too. So it's nice to have somebody there just to help you get on your way. So that's myself, very short and sweet.
I'm going to ask you a question already, Leon. What's cyber mentoring involved? Is that sort of helping new people within the industry, or?
Yes, new people in the industry, mostly people coming up from, say, university or colleges, or wanting to get into the field, not sure where to start, or maybe have already made their first starts and done a first year at uni, but where to go next? What should I focus on? What should I specialize in? And you'll see in one of the slides that even just in pen testing alone, which is a very niche element of IT and IT security, is where do you go into? Because you can't know everything about everything. Because you'd be spread a bit too thin. So that mentoring just allows you to help focus and feed somebody through, see what it is they have a strength in, and try help them work on that side of things. Just advice, general guidance, I'd say.
Very cool. Excellent.
But yeah, that's it really about me. I don't mind getting on with the slides. Still like talking about myself loads. So
there we go. Right, there's your agenda.
So the agenda for the slides is essentially what is pen testing, who needs it, why have it, when to have it, and then really how do we go about getting a pen test, what's involved, and what to expect during the course of a pen test. So hopefully we're going to cover the main topics specifically, some in depth, some a little bit lighter, but obviously any questions we can go over and cover as we go. So we'll start off with what is pen testing. You know, if there's ever need for this slide, it'll be right at the start. So pen testing. So penetration test, also known as the pen test, is essentially emulating a real world attacker. So you're trying to probe all the different perimeters of a network. So that could be from the external side of things. You might have a website, you might have file servers and email servers you're trying to get in from the outside. But it's also from the inside out. It may be that you've got somebody malicious threat actor on the inside. Maybe it's a disgruntled staff. Maybe it's a curious staff member clicking on things because they've seen a website or a TikTok video these days where they can do something that they thought was kind of cool. So you got the threats from all sides, all the different perimeters, all the different layers of your security. So a penetration test is designed to take all of these elements, get somebody who's trained in the field to try break through, to find all the weaknesses and the holes in each of these areas. And then we can show you where the vulnerabilities are so you can fix them before essentially a real hacker gets in and causes some real damage. That's essentially what your pen test is. And a pen test always comes then with, what's the result of your pen test? You're going to get a report. You're going to get a report which highlights all these vulnerabilities, how to fix them, and most importantly, your reference links and proof of concepts to show, look, they really are here. These aren't all theoretical. This isn't a vulnerability scan, which we'll go into later, but these are real exploits, real vulnerabilities, real holes that an attacker's going to get in. 1, 2, 3, here's where they ended up. And that's the output of a penetration test. But we're going to go into these in further slides. So as I was saying, there's a lot of different types of pen tests. I put together a few. There is more specific and niche elements than just my list that I've collated here, but these are your common ones. These are the ones typically you will do anyway from a SME to a multinational corporation. So you've got your internal pen test. So as I was saying, somebody on the inside, your internal network, your private IP space. Then you've got your external infrastructure. So that's specifically the IPs and attacking, not necessarily through a web app perspective, but the IPs that are associated with those. Then you've got the web application. So the websites, maybe it's your portal, maybe it's just the website on its own. APIs, so a bit more granular for the web app, still web app related. APIs do require testing. They're often overlooked because you think, well, you can't see anything. You have to send a specially crafted request to get the response that you want. But actually, if they're misconfigured, then maybe an attacker can get information back from that you weren't expected them to be able to see. Mobile applications, these are quite significant in the industry these days, particularly with the rise of devices. So we do mobile application tests. That's both Android and iOS. There used to be Windows in there, but we don't see those anymore. Wireless, but specifically Wi-Fi, because wireless can also be Bluetooth testing, but specifically the wireless testing and the security around those. A lot of companies that I go into these days, I found that there's not a lot with network cables anymore. They're using predominantly wireless-based infrastructure. Maybe it's easy for the office layout, but because of that, the security of that wireless, you're broadcasting that Wi-Fi generally out into the public. It extends past the walls of your building, and that's just as important to make sure that is secure, because no longer people having to come in and plug in an unknown device into your network, which may have security. They can sit in the car park and get access. So you need to make sure the wireless side is secure. Then you've got social engineering. So two main elements. There is many more than these, but you've got phishing. So that's your email campaigns. Most companies, you're probably going to be familiar with the phishing training and e-learning. And do I click this link? Does it look right? Is it malicious? Where does it come from? Do I trust the sender, etc.? But phishing is a very big part of what we do, and that's for education of the staff. And because clicking a simple link can result in a browser entirely being hijacked and compromised, or malicious software being downloaded or executed. So you've got the phishing side. There does exist. There's lots of terminologies. Smishing, for example, which is SMS phishing. A bunch of other ones, but your email ones are predominantly the ones that you're going to see. On-site physical access. This is one that I personally quite enjoy. That's trying to gain access to either a specific location or the company building as a whole. That's gaining entry either by just talking your way in, being able to fake badges, pick locks, cloning door access card systems and forcing your way through those, or as simple as tailgating your way through the doors because somebody's going to hold it open for you because it looks like you're struggling carrying all your bags. Once you're in, a lot of the time people just assume you're supposed to be there. It's human nature. Once you're in there, you can plug in, get connected, set up a device, maybe even plug in your remote access tool, and then leave and hack the company from the car park if it comes to it. So that's the physical on-site access controls. And then configurational pen testing. So build reviews of your laptops. Maybe you have a gold build or various different builds. Maybe your developers have one build of a device, a laptop, for example, or maybe your sales and your finance team have another build. They should all be tested as builds, as gold builds, because whilst one may be set one way, one may be set up another, but you find that over the years, slight changes in the configs. So a developer may need elevated privileges to run a particular tool or a particular piece of software to do something, and that gets rolled out to their department only. And then you'll realize, oh, actually, they have elevated privileges. They can get to local administrator, and then from there, they may be able to escalate their way up through the network to domain administrator. And these are things that need to be checked to ensure that they are locked down as much as they need to be. Cloud config reviews. So Azure, AWS, a lot of infrastructure now is moving to the cloud. These are to ensure that they're following good best practice, not just good practice, but best practice. There's 3 levels. And within these, if there's a misconfiguration within these, and it's happened with other companies, you may be able to access sensitive data, say, because the bucket has not been secured. So you can then find other sensitive content within those purely because they're missing a cloud config review. Firewall reviews, as the name suggests, that's just assessing whether or not what permissions are enabled on the firewall, what rules are allowed in, what rules are allowed out. And the groups, do they match, do they marry? And you often find that there's a couple in there that are redundant, or there's a few in there that contradicts others. So whilst it looks like it's really secure, you'll find a line further down that sort of contradicts the rest, and it's a possible way in. You've left the service exposed. So firewall review is quite important. MDM, so your mobile device management side of things, your mobile devices should also be reviewed. Compliance testing. So compliance is, again, it's another big field within pen testing. PCI, ISO, your PCI compliance, your PCI DSS, if you're taking card payment data. We will cover those on another slide, but that has its own element of pen testing and the rules that you have to abide by when doing a pen test for the PCI. ISO stipulates to have a pen test. There's a couple of others, again, we'll cover. And the environment breakouts, which is what I said I also enjoy. That's like your kiosk breakouts. So in shopping centers, it's all good working for companies such as Next, but then somebody's messed about and now it's showing you a New Looks catalog. Just because people can play, particularly with TikTok and other video services online now, people can play for the sake of playing. It might not be for malicious intent or purposes. Just it can become a pain for companies if people now are just playing. So I enjoy my environment breakouts.
So I've got a question for you on that, Leon.
Yeah,
I mean, there's
a lot to cover. This
is
why we do the mentoring. You can't learn all of them.
I learn all that. I'm sure you've probably got this in a future slide. I'll ask it now, and you can tell me it's going to be covered later if needs be. But I mean, it feels like do people have to kind of pick what they want here, or is this the case that like somebody from a team like such as yours comes in and goes, well, it looks like you've got kiosks, it looks like you've got some web apps, some APIs. Here's a scope of everything we need to do. Because I mean, if I was a layperson, I wouldn't really know where to start here, other than going, well, I think I'll just start with the internal or the external.
Exactly. So we do have a slide on this, as when I prepared earlier. Well, to answer your question in very short, and I'll answer it properly then on the other slide, is that twofold. One, either as a customer or client, you know what you have, and you have a little bit of experience. Therefore, you say, I have these IP addresses externally. Can you test them? Or you employ another company who says, and you say, please, can you help me figure out what my scope is so that we can do the relevant pen test? And that's why you have these third-party companies and IT managed service providers who will help guide you to let you know exactly what it is you should be doing. And whilst everybody should be doing everything, that's sometimes you don't need that. It's too much money. It's too much in one go. Be specific and prioritize. But we will cover it in one of the other slides. But yes, help is there by whatever company you're using for the pen test. So your managed service providers, they will help guide you through exactly what it is you need, and to make sure you're getting what you need, not just selling for the sake of selling.
Sounds good to me. Perfect. We've got a couple of questions in, but they're fairly general, so I'm going to leave those towards the end unless we get to a more relevant slide, and I'll skip on to the next one for you. There we go.
Okay, so following on from different types of pen testing, there's different ways we pen test, and these are some of the terminologies that you may have heard or seen before. You've got black box testing, grey box testing, and white box testing. To put it in their three basic elements, that is. So we start with black box testing. So black box testing, in short, is an attacker, a threat actor, or in our case, obviously ethical hackers, but a black box pen test is emulating an attacker with no further knowledge of the company, no insider information, they've not been given any IPs, they're not been given ranges. It's just, we're going to hack into a company. Let's do our online reconnaissance. Let's find as much information as we can about them and try hack into them. You don't have any further knowledge. You don't have any permission. You don't have any authentication outside of maybe self-registration forms, etc. But no internal knowledge of the system. Grey box is a mix between that and the white, as the name intends. This is actually your most common pen test from a pen test company's perspective. So a grey box. So what that means is, once we've defined the scope, again, which we'll cover in a few slides. So let's say me and corporation have said we want an external pen test. What they do is they say, we have 10 IP addresses, or here's an IP range, but here's our IPs. We want them pen tested. And that's about as much information as we get. And then we take those and we hack essentially into those IP addresses specifically. And that's it. That's about as much information as we typically have. Sometimes with web applications, it may be that they want, can you test this application unauthenticated, almost black box style. But then we also want you to test a user's login. If a logged in user, whether it be compromised or malicious intent, what can they do? So they, as a company, will provide us with a username and password. So, but that's as much information as you get. So, and I say that's quite typical of normal pen tests, purely because two elements, cost and speed for the customer. So if we implement black box testing, which we still do, you then have to have the reconnaissance time assigned to that to go out, find all the infrastructure and the IP addresses and as much information as you want. But, and this is quite important, the legalities around this is that we can't just do that reconnaissance, get that list of information and IP addresses, and then start hacking away, because we need to make sure we're testing the real, actual, this is yours, and we've not mistaken it for another company. So then that has to be supplied back. That company will then say, yes, these are ours, these are not ours. Then they define that list. Then we hack that list. So what we're doing in a grey box test is saying, let's assume someone's done this reconnaissance side of things. If you want, you can speed it up, give us these IP addresses as though we spent a day of recon, 2 days of recon, however long that's been supplied, and we'll get going. So you've saved time and money there already. And then we start testing from that perspective, and we get, the legalities there. We've been providing it. We've got the signed contract to say, this is our scope, this is ours. And then white box testing, that is, we know everything. We've got source code, we've got documentation. API is quite commonly referred to as white box testing. If API is provided with the username, the credentials, and the documentation, so the exact calls required, because with API, you need to make specific calls and requests. That is white box testing. And without that, you would spend more time getting false positives. So they're the three different elements and different types of testing. As I say, most common is your grey box. So then, in terms of the pen test delivery, it's broken down into 6 areas. Scoping, again, I've got a slide we'll cover. Setting your schedule. Then we have something called a pre-engagement call, which is essentially a, what's the word for this? It's a courtesy call ahead of the test to make sure that everything is as it should be, so there's no delays to your testing. Then you conduct the pen test. Then you get your report or your report generation and delivery. So that can often fall in a debrief. So you'll get a report, but also a sit down, a talk with the tester, so you can put it all into perspective. It's not just jargon on a page. And then any retesting, if applicable. So that's your 6 elements of a pen test delivery. So then, who needs a pen test? The big question. Answer: everyone. Now that's a lazy answer. I do have another slide. So, but really, everybody should have a pen test. But that's the ideal world. To break it down, SMEs, small businesses, medium-sized businesses should get a pen test. I'll cover why again shortly. Your MSPs, they all need pen tests. Your big multinational corporations all need pen tests. And then the compliance side of things, some of these mandate pen tests. You legally have to have a pen test if you fall inside these. So that's your less lazy answer. So if we move on to, say, for example, the compliance. So PCI DSS, you may have heard of before. If you're taking payment card information, you're taking card payments, you may fall inside this requirement. So what this slide is essentially is showing you all of these compliance requirements where a pen test specifically is mandated. So PCI DSS 11.3 and the subversions is an annual external, annual internal, annual segmentation testing, and any changes, have another pen test. 6 months, have another pen test. It's required by law now for these. ISO 27001, whilst that's it's not a mandated regulation, it's voluntary. It does, if you're trying to apply and get your ISO, you need pen tests, you need management of technical vulnerabilities, you need security testing. So that requires it. And DORA fairly new. Again, we'll cover in another slides, I'm sure. That's for the financial sector, similar to PCI DSS, but it's sort of a mix between PCI and ISO, where it dictates that you have to have a pen test. So why should we have a pen test? Why? We've heard of it. We know what they're all there, but why do I need it as a company? Why do I need it as an individual or a startup? So small businesses, they have common vulnerabilities, usually because with a smaller company, and this obviously doesn't apply to everywhere, if you're a smaller company, the resources are often perhaps less. Maybe the money from a cost perspective isn't quite there. So the budget, or maybe the focus, maybe the priority isn't there for wasting resources on a security pen test. But small businesses do need them because they are targeted. They're targeted for that purpose specifically. So they need to make sure that they have a pen test where they can, even small light touch approaches. MSPs, obviously managed service providers, they absolutely need a pen test. They absolutely need a pen test, and they do. The MSPs, they get pen tested. They know the whole risk of, if they are vulnerable, their clients are vulnerable in many cases. They're critical roles in the IT services. They have higher risk because of all the different clients and infrastructure that they support. And in fact, they specifically have a thing called supply chain attacks. So I did make some notes here for supply chain attacks, which I'll get up for you. So I'll give you an example. SolarWinds. So SolarWinds back in 2022, I think, sort of COVID-ish time period. So SolarWinds got attacked. And attackers compromised their, basically attackers breached SolarWinds in their software update platform, which then other IT companies and even government institutions used to pull their updates. And what the attackers did was they implemented their own specific vulnerability in that update. So when everybody pulled that update, their systems became vulnerable. So then they were able to get in through a backdoor and compromise and intercept traffic. They was able to compromise and get backdoors onto their infrastructure and services, all because of the supply chain. So if you were using SolarWinds in this particular version, you'll be vulnerable to attack because the person above you who helps manage it got compromised. It's called a supply chain attack. So MSPs they're a big target also. And then multinational corporations, as you expect. A multinational doesn't really differ too much from a SME or an MSP perspective. They're just bigger. So because they're generally bigger and spread diverse across the world, there's more technologies often used and maybe more complex. So because the attack surface is larger, there's an increased risk that there's more ways in, essentially. So right from the small business right through to multi-corp, they all need a pen test. They need to have a pen test. So, and again, I keep putting compliance in here purely because there is a fine line between being mandated to have a pen test and doing it because you value the customers and the information security. But a slide wouldn't be a slide if I didn't throw any stats and figures into here. So hopefully you can see this okay. You don't have to read through them all. I'll just explain what it is. But this is the percentage of organizations. So between 2022 and 2023, for that 12-month period, those that experienced a cyber crime specifically that reported that, 12% of those were small businesses, 26% were medium businesses, 37% were large businesses. I'm not going to read them all. You guys can see them also. But even charities are targeted. And 8% were charities that fell victim to cybercrime. So as you can see from here, you can see, don't go based on it. Well, we're a micro, so we're less percent chance of getting hit. 10% is a lot, given how many. Yeah. So
a question there. I mean, in terms of that kind of that whole piece, is it the fact that, does it, if you have a pen test, are you potentially likely to reduce something like your cyber insurance premium? I don't know if that applies, whether they would look at pen testing as a benefit, but also in the event that you did say have a breach and you had to report to the ICO or something like that, are you likely to be kind of better seen on the basis that you've kind of taken that action, you've done some pen testing rather than being completely blind to your risks?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, the difference then there being, say, the compliance where you're regulated to, if you fell under something like PCI or where fines are implemented if you get breached, then if you can prove that it's not through, I want to see negligence. It's not negligence, but if you're seen to be trying and do something, if you can say, look, we get a yearly pen test, we've got a quarterly pen test, we've at least pen tested in 1 year and then tried to keep on top of it ourselves. If you're shown to be doing something, then it sort of takes a bit of that away from who's to blame, essentially. If you're a company that hasn't done any pen testing and hasn't shown any advancements towards information security in a sense, then they'll be asking why. And that may affect the fines. I'm not sure in terms of the insurance side of things. I think there are some elements where you have to have a pen test, you have to be insured with particular ones, but I'm afraid I can't really answer that one. I don't fully know, but it's something that we can probably look at.
Perfect. Right.
So again, I'll read all these out because you can see the screen, but again, so why are these companies having them? What if they don't have them? Well, if you get hacked, if you get breached, you got your reputational damage, so your loss of trust from your customers, your financial loss, that could be direct costs from disruption to business, ransom payments. So if you get cryptoware or ransomware across all your files, are you paying that? Are you not? Do you lose all that data? And it might even be fines incurred from the breach. Data loss that's either loss from destruction, crypto. So someone's deleted it, someone's encrypted it, so you no longer have access. Someone's stolen it entirely. Your significant fines, as I was saying, your penalties for non-compliance. So, your GDPR and your PCI. Operational disruption, so that's your downtime of business. Somebody breaks in and you've got a denial of service, or the integrity of all the files and the data is now, you can't trust it and it needs to be shut off to help prevent spread, for example. Not being able to operate obviously incurs its own costs also. Legal consequences, lawsuits from customers because your data is being breached, as well as GDPR fines because you were held liable for not securing the data where it should be. and the loss of intellectual property. So whilst people can steal the data, if you've got proprietary data that's crucial and critical to your business, maybe you're a car manufacturer and you have a specific design that you don't want out there, if that gets stolen and lost, then it's theft of intellectual property. All of these can result from not knowing where your risks are and knowing if you're vulnerable to attack. And that's the importance of having your pen test. So when should we have a pen test? So that's a question that I do get asked quite a bit. When should I have it? And that does differ from the type of company you are, SME to MSPs. I'd say there's no real or wrong answer here. And I say that because I wrote it. But then I since realized that isn't right. There is a wrong answer, and that's never. Really, you should be trying to have some sort of pen test. It doesn't even necessarily mean paying a third-party company to come in and evaluate and test. It could be that you assign, even as a short-term measure, your internal IT resource or person to be able to try pen test and do a vulnerability scan just to have a look at it. So there are different frameworks out there. And again, I'm going to refer to regulations again, because whilst this may not apply to everybody, it shows that there are at least some sort of common ground between all of these different frameworks that try to say and give an idea of when to have a pen test. Because otherwise the question is, well, how long is a piece of string? So if I was to take the answers from all these other regulatory frameworks, the short answer would be annually. Get pen tested annually as a minimum. Have a pen test after a significant change. So that's significant being network infrastructure changes. So maybe you've got new hardware built in, maybe you've redesigned the network, maybe you've acquired another company. Once you've had a significant change to your network, get a pen test. Compliance requirements, you're required. So get a pen test before that audit date is due. If you're on an ISO or PCI and you've got an audit date coming up in a couple of months, whereby if you don't pass your pen test, you have very limited time to either fix it or fail it, then get a pen test beforehand. If you've had a security incident, you feel like you've had a breach or you suspect something, have a pen test. See how maybe they got in. Now, this is different to incident response. That a pen test after a breach is not an incident response. Incident response will go in and figure out exactly how they did it. A pen test will just help identify other ways and methods to get in. So try fill those cracks. If you've rolled out a new application, get a pen test on that new application. You don't have to test everything, and just a periodic risk assessment. If you think, well, we do this all the time, it's quite fine. Throw something in the works. Throw a random one in just to change it up a little bit. Okay, so how do we go about getting a pen test? So there looks to be a lot of content on this slide, and I realize I'm talking more than I thought I was going to be talking, so I'll go through them a little bit quicker. I'm also going to make this slightly larger, so bear with me. So in the terms of the top three, you've got the scoping, the schedule, and the pre-engagement. Sorry, the first three. Defining the scope. Typically, the scope is defined by the customer or the client. That it's yourselves who define your scope. This is what we have. You know what you have. We don't know what you have. We would like this testing. But there's elements where maybe you don't fully know what you have, or you would like some help and engagement with that. So this is where I mentioned before, where reconnaissance can take a part. Maybe a company says, look, we have a range of IP addresses, but we've not really kept track of what's on them so much over the years. We could do with some help looking into them. So you can have a reconnaissance period of which we'll go and say, okay, we'll take that range, we'll find out what's on them, we'll do some probing, some services, we'll help figure it out and say, look, out of these 50 IP addresses that you gave us, you've actually got 20 of them with stuff running, stuff are on them, get those tested. And I say that because it's a numbers game. Scoping is a numbers game. How do we know how long something's going to take to test? Well, we kind of have to try to find it somewhere. So it's a numbers game. If you were to give us 2/24s, I think I wrote that on here, that could be 500 plus IP addresses, of which we would then have to say, well, 500 IP addresses is going to take quite a long time to test. If you only have a small sample of those that are actually live, defining those live IPs as your scope reduces the cost, reduces the time to test. So it's quite important to work out what you have. More complex networks, more complex applications, it may be that we can't do it on numbers. We can't just ask or provide a scoping form that says, fill out this information. We'll tell you how long it'll take. It may require a call. We might have a call. We may need a demo of the web application. Maybe it's locked behind an authenticated panel where we can't see in there. So I don't know how long it's going to take. So I don't know how big the application is. Maybe a web demo is provided by the customer. And then we'll say, right, okay, well, this will take X amount of days. So then we take those and we work on the schedule. So we'll work closely alongside to say, well, when do you need this by? Is it regulatory, compliance? Do you have a rollout of a new application? When do you need this by? We'll do our best to try fit it within the time frame. So let's say you have 3 days assigned for a particular pen test, we'll see where that 3 days can come in. We'll agree the schedule, and then we'll get that booked in with the pen tester and the company. And then maybe a week.
Just on that one, sorry,
yes, sure.
Just with that schedule, because I guess it's quite important. Is there well, actually, Daniel had a question in the chat about can the business continue as normal, or is there downtime? So do you need to be scheduling this at a time when people aren't working, or do you need it to be when kind of everybody's in the office? How does that typically look?
Sure. So it depends on the pen test. Normally, business as usual. Short answer is business as usual. There may be times where you're doing a specific test which may increase, say, load on a particular server because that particular test demands it, which you would know in advance. It would be agreed upon, where then testing may be performed out of hours, for example. But typically, it's business as usual. If you're doing an internal pen test, you mostly want to be testing when people are there, because that's when more laptops and hosts are online.
Yeah.
So in short, it's usually business as usual. No shutdown time required.
I guess that also touches on his other question about, he's got a question earlier on about, does a pen test leave any damage afterwards? And I guess I would add to that, is the whole process non-destructive in terms of how it works?
It is. So we do have a slide almost right at the end of this, just to say what's to be expected in your pen test. But yeah, no, as much as possible, because I don't want to say never, it's very much damage-free. The only things you'll get left behind maybe is your logs. Your logging is going to increase. But the test and what's there shouldn't be any noticeable side effects. Depending on the test, if an internal pen test and I've elevated my way to a domain administrator, I may have created a user account. All of these are recorded and logged by ourselves as testers. So where you would say, hello, this is, we got all the way to domain admin. I've created this user and this user. Make sure that you disable or delete them after the pen test. Once we have left, they're currently there as an audit trail, so you know what accounts we used. But yeah, so no disruption, no loss of data. And I use that tentatively as much as possible, because often we'll test in non-live environments depending on the data that's there. Otherwise, we have to tone down the type of testing because it's ethical testing. We're not attackers and hackers where they don't care about the data. We still care about the data and the business integrity and continuity. So we will lighten the load on the testing if we really have to, just because we don't affect and disrupt the customers.
Perfect. Makes perfect sense. Right. Sorry, I'll let you carry on with you.
All good. So once you've had the schedule, the pre-engagement call, then is your courtesy call ahead of, let's say, a week before your pen test. Touch base with the tester, get to know who the tester is, work out if there's been any slight changes. You're going to confirm your dates, your scope, check the third-party permissions if they're required. If you host a website or services in a data center, let's say Rackspace as a data center, they may require you to let them know if you're going to be having a pen test. It might be in their terms and conditions. So this sort of gives some time in case it's been forgotten to say, have you got the permission? Have you notified them? Because you may be breaching your terms and conditions with them, and you don't want them to shut your service down thinking that it's under attack when really it's not. They can look at it and see it and not disable it, essentially.
That's a great point. Is that something, I can imagine that could be a challenge, because with certain companies, I mean, MSP is a great example. We have a lot of vendors where, there's data that an attacker would want to get access to. So therefore, I guess you'd have to communicate all those vendors and say, we're having a pen test. This might extend to your infrastructure. Can they say? I assume they can say no.
They can say no. Yeah, they can say no. Ideally, they wouldn't, and most do not. I'd be cautious of any data center that says no.
No.
Because you want to make sure. Now, the only reason the only times they would say that is, let's say it's a shared web server. So you are multi-tenanted. You just run a normal website, but there's 100 other websites on that same server. They may say no, because the pen test may, depending on their setup or even accidentally, affect that server's performance, which will affect everybody else. So there's times where they may limit the pen test, but as long as they know. And another point is, other data centers, or even the cloud, let's say Azure or AWS, for example, there's a lot of companies that explicitly have rules of engagement for a pen test. They allow it. They explicitly say, we allow you to pen test, and you do not need to let us know, providing you stay within the realms of these rules of engagement, which is very standard and typical of any pen test. It basically says, do not perform denial of service against us, particularly intentionally. That's largely it. So there's a lot that you may find you don't need, or full well they don't need the permission in advance. So it's usually about building up a list. A pen test company often knows your common ones. When you do your scoping exercise, you work out where things are. You'll have a look and you'll help say, well, I've never heard of this place. Go check with them. Or we know of this place. They don't require you to let them know.
Makes sense. Perfect.
And then it answers any other further questions on the pre-engagement call. As I say, courtesy call, and it helps fix a bunch of issues before the start of your test. If you have an issue on the start of your test, everybody loses time. So it's important to have. So I think this one's over for you, Craig.
Well, there you go. This is quite easy. So in terms of contacting us, obviously you can arrange a pen test through us, and that will typically be an engagement with IT governance and somebody like Leon. Might even be Leon. You never know. So you can drop us an email, info@onefix. You can give us a call. You can visit the website, or I would recommend you, if you're on this call and you're not already connected with me on LinkedIn, do get connected, because not only can you get in touch with me, but you can read all the amazing content on LinkedIn. But we will be putting out a lot about pen testing, and obviously copies of the recording of the webinar and that kind of thing that you can share with the team. So yeah, the most straightforward way of getting a pen test would be to get in touch with us. Back to you again now, Leon. Sorry, that was quick and brief.
Here we go. So what to expect during a pen test? I'm hoping this answers, again, some of the questions from before. So this is your last three elements of your pen test remit, essentially. So once we've done your pre-engagement call, you've had that a week before. It's now the start of your pen test. It's the day of your pen test. So conducting the test, what am I expecting? You're going to get an increased traffic to your target host or associated network. Obviously, this is dependent on the type of pen test you have. But as a standard pen test, external, internal, web app, most of them, you're going to have increased traffic. We're going to send a lot of requests. That's because there's a mixture of automated and manual pen tests, or manual testing going ahead. You're going to get an increase in authentication attempts. Now, we are mindful, again, of lockouts, for example. So if this is a web app and we'll test one user and we'll see if there's a logout policy or not. We're going to be testing for default user accounts and credentials. If we feel there's a risk of locking a user out, be it an internal pen test or an actual user on a web app, we will not. We'll do our best to not lock them out. But the areas where there is no protection in place to prevent or to lock out a user account, you're going to get an increased authentication attempts. So this is all part of your logging. Your IDS, so any sort of intrusion detection system you have, or even just your security alerts and audits, they're going to go crazy. They're going to say, whoa, we're being attacked. Somebody help. It's going to come through, which is why we provide our IP addresses to say, when we're doing a pen test, this is who we are, this is where we're coming from, which is allow you either two things: to filter your IDS so you can still identify actual attacks happening if they coincidentally happen on the same time that we're doing a test, because you don't want to be blinded and not be able to see actual threats coming in. Alternatively, you might whitelist through the IDS so that you don't see the alerts, say, that are happening from a pen test. Again, so you can see real time and real attacks coming through. An IDS, intrusion detection system, is obviously tipped to an IPS, which is your protected system, where your IDS is only your alerting and your monitoring side of things. Your IPS will actively block and detect the attack coming in.
That's a good question, actually. Like, for those companies that either have something like intrusion prevention system, or they have a SOC, or MXDR, something that's a little bit more sophisticated than just your bog standard kind of AV protection. I'm assuming in this instance they shouldn't be telling any of those providers about this, and they should just let those tools do what they can to stop the attack, because I guess you want to see that they are either effective or where they're ineffective on that basis.
Yep. So two options on here. And again, we discussed this as during the scoping engagement. If you have an intrusion prevention system or even a web application firewall, something that will block attacks, you've got two choices. Your first one is to test as is. Everything left enabled. Don't tell the SOC, don't whitelist through an IPS. When we do the pen test, if the IPS does its job and identifies the attack and blocks, and let's say that's within the first 30 minutes, you then have a further two options. One, there's nothing much else you can do. We can't see it anymore. We can't test it anymore. We can change to a different IP address and try again, but after that, we can't see it. So therefore, the results and the report will show an IPS or WAF or some sort of protection system kicked in, did its job, but unfortunately, whilst there is no results in the report, it may be that it's masked any potential vulnerabilities. But it's a green tick to say it was tested and the IPS kicked in. But because there are ways to get past an IPS and a web application firewall, it mostly comes down to time-based. Because of the way IPSs work and they're looking for attacks, and if you slow down attacks and you change the frequency and craft it specifically, you can get the odd probe in, and then you get another probe in later, and you change it up again. It's a very slow element. We can test that way. Again, it's covered in the scoping, so you know. But that will significantly increase the time it takes to pen test and the cost involved in that. Your other option is you test, it blocks us, or it doesn't. You do the test, and then you whitelist the IP. So we make a note. Testing started at 9 o'clock. Certain tests went through. The IPS blocked all access. IPS kicked in 10 o'clock. Whitelisted the IP address. We got whitelisted. Pen testing resumed. So then the report will reflect that. IPS kicked in to say the security was in place. It detected the attack and blocked it like a real world test. Whitelisting happened so that the pen test could continue in the event somebody then, a real attacker, spent the next month slowly trying to pen test or penetrate the network. And if they got past the IPS, what would they have seen? So it emulates that side of things, whilst the report, I think, fairly states that. So it's not necessarily you're getting red crosses because you allowed them in. It sort of works both ways. So that's the route that goes down. Or you can whitelist right from the very beginning to say, we're trying to skip all these sides. We don't want to spend time on these. Whitelist right from the start. Tell the SOC team it's happening, just because we want to know what we've got if they do get past. We'll assume they've got past. We'll assume they've taken the time. We've got past whitelist and denies and allowed, and we're just going straight to the core points of the test. So they're your options, really. So to cover that quickly again, Craig, that was test with it on, see if it blocks us, test whitelisted, and emulate the fact that they've gotten through with slower testing techniques.
Fantastic. Great answer. Thanks, Liam.
Automated and manual testing. We've got another slide on this. I'm going to run through these a bit quicker. We use automated testing as well as manual testing because there's lots of low-hanging fruit, and checking services for versions and checking that version against the database, and does that database then contain known exploits and vulnerabilities. That process for a big scope will take a long time, but it's very rudimentary. It's very easy. So we'll implement an automated tool or a scan to find those things, which allows us to focus on more specific stuff. We can target directly. We can chain things together to be able to pen test through. So that's why there's an increase in traffic, because you get the automated as well as the manual. Once your pen test is concluded, depending on the test, you may have a debrief. So that's a sit down, either virtually or face to face, with the tester to cover what happened in the pen test, what we found, why is it valuable, what's the important bit out of all this stuff and all the fluff. What do I need to know? And it makes it unique to the customer. Then you get the report. So we generate the report, comes in two main sections. You get an executive summary side of the report, which goes to your execs, less technical, but more to answer their question of, are we vulnerable and how bad are we? Or how good is it, from both sides. And then you get the technical details section of the report, which highlights and identifies all the vulnerabilities, the proof of concepts, the IPs, how to fix them, what's the remediation advice, any references, any links, all the technical stuff that the execs maybe care so much about, they just want to pass to their IT guys or whoever manages it to fix it. So the report comes in the two main sections. The executive summary is often quite good when customers need or want to know, how did you do? Well, so we say, well, actually, look, we're either clear or we only have two low issues here. You can see it. We can give you this without providing them with too much information in the report. The reports are typically issued, up to 10 working days after the testing. Retesting as standard is not included in a pen test. It's normally negotiated as part of the scoping. So because you don't know what you're going to find, you can't really assign days or time or costs to a retest when you don't know what there's going to be. So the last thing you want to do is charge somebody, I don't know, a few days for a retest and you don't need it. But it's already been paid, contract signed, alternatively, it could go the other way. What we try to do, or what we often do, is we will retest only the identified vulnerabilities rather than retest everything. If you've got a missing version and that's the only different, an outdated version, and that's the only difference between having a nice clean report and not, you don't want to pay and get everything retested again. We'll just retest that one vulnerability. So within 30 days of the pen test, you get things remediated and we retest it. We just remove it from the report, nice clean report, and it's reissued. After 30 days, again, we'll retest those specific vulnerabilities, but they'll still remain in the report and just say remediated. And then there's the next thing after that. It's called a repeat test, where you buy, maybe there was lots of stuff. There was lots of vulnerabilities, lots of issues everywhere. It's been a while. It's been a couple of months because it's been a big project to get remediated. Repeat test. Repeat test is as it sounds. We're going to retest as is, this many hosts, this many scope. This is our scope. The same days. We're going to redo it again, see where we're at. So that's how things. Example attack vectors. So if you're maybe interested to see, well, what sort of things am I looking at? For the web side of things, I've obviously only picked 3 for each of these. Web app, you've got your injection vulnerabilities, cross-site scripting, SQL injection, your XML, your template injections. These are data that's input into a web application that is not sanitized, that may cause the web app to act in a way where we can exploit it or extract data from it. Your broken access controls, that's your authentication pages and your portals. That's maybe forced directory browsing. Maybe you've got a login page and a user, but when you log out, that session doesn't expire. If that's then cached, somebody can still log back in even without the credentials. Maybe it's accessing pages. If I browse to them directly, even if I'm not logged in, they will still present the page. Failures. Crypto failures, that's your SSL, your TLS. That's using older versions or vulnerable versions of SSL and TLS, which are known to have cryptographic failures, which could allow attackers to, if appropriately situated on the network, intercept the requests back and forth so they can see the data within there. External equally have cryptographic failures. So that's your example of cryptographic failures is version TLS. TLS, anything lower than version 1.0 or even 1.1 is considered weak. The lower down you get through there, SSL version 3, version 2, but they have significantly more known vulnerabilities. So anything below 1.2, I believe, or even 1.3 these days, is known as cryptographic failure. Sensitive data disclosure. Do you have data on services that are easily accessible to anyone on the internet that you weren't aware of? Might even be an FTP service, might be something that doesn't actually require authentication, which ties in with your exposed services. Do you have internal services exposed externally? Do you have SMB, for example? Do you have an NFS internally somehow in your GMZ that is publicly exposed? Your internal pen test, your internal networks, these exploits, some of the good ones that I enjoy exploiting is your NetBIOS. and your LLMNR, so that is your network and broadcasts over your network, they can be intercepted either in plain text or in the hashed value. Password reuse across accounts, be it domain users, domain admins, or even local administrator accounts if a server or host has a local administrator hash, but that local admin is the same user account on every other machine that got built, because maybe it was a gold build. Once one is compromised, the rest are considered compromised, because it just creates a brittle security. Missing patches, very common on internals. Missing patches can often allow just immediate exploitation of the servers. Mobile, so we've not really talked about the mobile side so much, but insecure data storage. Maybe your databases on your phones have databases on them often, and the applications, if they use them and that database is not encrypted, it's possible, depending on the setup and the configuration, that you can view the data within those databases, and it's quite easy to see and to do. Unintended data leakage. This is often developers, when they write a mobile application, they maybe have test files or dummy data, or even legitimate comments and notes in the files that they've created when building the application. That is still there. I tested a mobile application for a bank a few years ago, and they left account numbers and sort codes and details that they were using to test, but they were live. They were live data, and they left them in the comments. But you have to extract the mobile app and to view those files. So that's an example of unintended data leakage. And insecure configs. Can you back up the mobile app? Can you gain access to it? Does the application run on a rooted device, non-rooted device, stay equally, increase and decrease the security of the mobile app? Pen test versus vulnerability scanning. I know I touched on this earlier. So a vulnerability scan is not a pen test. Vulnerability scans are still important. This is not, I tried not to word it in a way it's one is better than the other. It is, but it fits its own purpose. It's a vulnerability scan is an automated scan. It's automated, but because it's automated, you get automated output. And because of that, you'll get lots of false positives. And unless you have a resource there to be able to interpret it, to get out exactly what you need, it can be a bit overwhelming. However, it works because it still finds a bunch of low-hanging fruit, which might be your very first step before you even get a pen test. Clear up the estate, clear up the application, clear up, the host to get 10 criticals down to only finding 3 mediums. Work it that way. So that way your pen test becomes cheaper because there's less chance of retest perhaps needed. There's less expertise required to run a vulnerability scan. Get some tools, get some software, automate it, run it, and that's it. But you can run them regularly and frequently and all the time once you have them to get yourself into a better standing. But it lacks the depth of analysis. So that means you can't see chaining of vulnerabilities. You don't have the human element to see. A vulnerability scan may say this is a low-level risk, and a pen tester may come in and go, that's low, but because of this and this that you have, this now becomes a high, and we'll show you why. And a vulnerability scan is often cheaper because you're running the tool, either commercial software or open source, and there's 3 versions. Your pen test is your object-driven pen test. We have this. We want you to do this. Can you get to it? Can you do it? Can you find these files? Can you get to this data? Where your vulnerability scan can't necessarily do that, but you do need the expertise required. Maybe you have an in-house SOC team. They can do a pen test. That's okay. Third-party companies, again, you're probably paying for this. You're paying for your SOC team. You're paying for the expertise of the person. But the results of a pen test, as I said, can be interpreted. It pulls out the false positives, and it tells you exactly what is required and why it's important, and what's relevant to you as a company. Because what may be high for one company might not be high for another. You can chain the attacks together. A low may become a high if they so fit together. It takes that human element to be able to see and understand how the networks work, to be able to chain them together. But a pen test can be more expensive, but you pay for what you get in that element. So just quickly about us, what it's important to know, credentials and accreditations. Get a pen test, wherever you get your pen test, ensure the person doing it, they have the right certification skills, and and background to be able to do a proper pen test. You're giving people access potentially to elements and data that you have to be trusted. You have to know that they're not going to make mistakes. They're not going to accidentally delete all the data or compromise the security and integrity of that network. So it's important to know what they do, where they've been, what experience do they have. Anybody can do the pen test as long as they've got the skills, but do the background, do the due diligence to check. IT governance under GRCI, these are our credentials and accreditations. Hopefully that speaks a lot for itself. And unfortunately, I don't have time for live demo because I talk too long.
I'm conscious of time. We're pretty much at the end of time. I'm going to very quickly ask you the couple of questions that are in the chat that we haven't covered, because I think it's very important we cover those off. So, great question starting off from Stuart, which I think is a brilliant one. What's the most surprising thing you've learned during your time as a pen tester that you wish you did not know? So what have you found?
How little security, what's the word? What the wording? How some companies don't take security seriously in companies you would expect to take it seriously. I can't give names, but there's many companies that I've been to where you've entrusted them with your information and data and financial information and realized there's no security there. It's not there, and they haven't took it seriously. They probably have since then. Obviously, they took the time to have a pen test. You need to take that first step. But it's that big companies are not dedicating the resource to pen test. Yeah.
Makes sense. Next question from Hazel. Hazel has asked, when carrying out pen testing, do you tend to find that companies have the same common issues being identified, or is it a really wide variety of issues across them all?
It's a wide variety of issues, but that's because, as you've seen, it's a wide variety of pen tests. However, all pen tests at all companies are the same. They just have slightly different technologies. So yeah, there's common vulnerabilities across all of them that you expect to see. So when I get to do an internal pen test, for example, I'm doing the same checks right at the very beginning because I expect them to probably have them, and it sets the tone for the rest of the test. If they don't have them and they're secured, then the chances are they're secured against the rest of them. But until you've had that first pen test and you've had your eyes open to, I didn't know that was vulnerable, I didn't know that could be vulnerable, then they probably wouldn't have known. So yeah, you find SMEs have the similar vulnerabilities, MSPs have similar vulnerabilities, all because they're at different stages in their advancement of security.
Perfect sense. And Daniel has a question, which is actually a question that I think Jess and I have got as well. Is can we send these slides out? Are we okay to distribute these to webinar attendees? Is that okay with you?
Yeah. I have no problem with that.
Nothing secret in there. No, perfect.
No.
Great. Well, that wraps all the questions. Leon, really appreciate your time today. It was brilliant. I think it's really insightful. Everybody who's been on, thank you very much. There will be recordings available. I think we'll be putting this up on YouTube as well if you missed it and you want to share it with the staff. Jess will send around the slides and we'll do some follow-up with you all. But thank you very much for being on. Appreciate your time, everybody. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Cool. Bye.